Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So pretty much since I started my channel, or started doing regular videos on my channel a couple of years ago now, one of the things, there are two or three things actually that keep coming up, but one of the things that people keep asking me about, and have kept asking me about pretty much ever since the beginning, is these. Okay, flails, sometimes known by various other people as morning stars, although I would debate a Morgenstern and morning star is more likely a mace, a spiky on a stick without the chain bit. And in fact, yes, these are do go by in different forms. You get some that are just two pieces of wood, and one of the pieces of wood is sort of iron shod at the end, and there isn't much in the way of chain or linkage between them. But this is the most iconic and well-known style. This is a real functional one with a solid iron head. You do find lots of these on places like Etsy and I believe even eBay that are decorative only. Be very wary if you're buying one of those of hitting anything with it, because the ball is very often a cast alloy, and the connection point there will break and the ball will fly off into a neighbour's garden or through a window or into a friend's head, which you don't want, clearly. But one of the questions that comes up most often about flails, in fact there are several questions that come up pretty often about flails, is were they actually used? Well, the answer is yes. It seems that they were. Flails were definitely used in the Middle Ages. However, what we can say, and I think this is why probably, let's say 10 years ago-ish, 10, 15 years ago, there was a pervasive kind of attitude on the internet that these were fantasy weapons made up essentially by Hollywood, and that in actual fact they weren't used in the medieval period. And the reason for this is because about 15 years ago, people, medievalists and people involved in the SCA and reenactment and things like this, discovered the internet, and the internet suddenly exploded with forums and methods of research, and people started looking at manuscript images and realised, where are these things? They don't appear in manuscripts, or at least they didn't think they did. And so for years everyone had assumed, because of course we see these in Hollywood movies made all the way back, you know, they were very popular in films in the kind of 40s and 50s and right the way through to the 60s in kind of crusader films. This was a popular weapon because of course they look cool, swinging them around on film and smashing shields and smashing people in armour with them. And of course you can make the ball of something more friendly, essentially a painted tennis ball, and you can wallop actors with it and they go, oh, smash, like they've been smashed by a heavy iron object. And they look cool on film. And of course they're featured in fantasy art and all of this kind of things like Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games and all of that kind of stuff. So, and then people discovered the internet and started looking at manuscripts and were like, we can't find these things, where the hell are they? And so this secondary urban legend came about saying that, oh, they weren't actually used in the Middle Ages. However, as time's gone by and our resources have grown, in other words the number of manuscripts that we know about, and not just manuscripts but tapestries, frescoes, all of the sort of big spectrum of medieval art and Renaissance art started to be studied, people were like, yeah, no, they definitely did exist, but they just weren't common. And there were various and I'll talk about this in a future video with more historical data, but there were various peoples, most notably around the area of Bohemia, who did use these in specific contexts. So, yes, they were used, yes, they do appear in medieval art, however they were very clearly not a common weapon. They're not mentioned very often in text sources in most of Europe. There's a region of Central Europe where they were sort of popular in the 15th century, but I'll talk about that in a future video. But they do appear in, I know, a Burgundian tapestry from the late 15th century, I think it's about 1480, that shows one of these. They appear in Italian art, and they appear in different forms. Sometimes they've got a long handle, sometimes they've got a short handle, like this. Some people have said, oh, the long-handled one existed, but the short-handled ones didn't exist. Well, again, that's not true. The short-handled ones do appear in medieval art, so we have short-handled ones and long-handled ones, and when I say long-handled, I mean right the way up to sort of head height. And there are some with a very short chain, some with a longer chain, some with a super long chain, and some which don't have any chain at all, that are, as I mentioned before, essentially two sticks, like the agricultural thresher, which is where we think that this originates from. So a thresher is something for thrashing corn, and you put all of your harvested corn in a heap, and lots of farmers hit it with threshers, and what happens is all the corn falls out, or wheat or whatever it is, falls out of the pods or whatever it's in and falls to the bottom, and then separating the wheat from the chaff, that's where the saying comes from, you take the chaff away and you're left with the wheat at the bottom. So those threshers, obviously farmers realised they were very effective weapons, and at some point people going to war realised they were quite effective weapons, especially if you added some heavy iron bits at the end and spikes and stuff like this. They do not always have spikes on them. Sometimes, even with the ball type, sometimes the ball is a plain ball. Sometimes it's more than one ball, as many as 3, but usually it's one ball or sometimes 2 balls. And they can be bigger balls, smaller balls, smooth balls, spiked balls. I don't think I've ever seen a flanged ball in a historical source. I know I've seen recreations of like a flanged mace, but I don't think I've ever seen an original one like that. So yes, they existed in various forms, but were not massively popular. In terms of the usage of this thing, again I'm going to do a future video about that, but just to say one thing, the general rule is indeed that the swinging bit should be shorter than the handle bit, such that it doesn't crack you in the hand. However, having said that, there are Indian and Indo-Persian versions of flails, and yes, they were used in India as well. It wasn't just medieval Europe, they were used in 16th, 17th, 18th century India and Persia. And there are examples from there where actually the chain is considerably longer than the handle. Now, I, believe it or not, I grew up using flails. That sounds like a weird thing to say, but at a very young age I was interested in medieval weapons, and one of the earliest things that I recreated myself, I believe involving a cricket ball with a piece of chain and a wooden handle, and it was obviously not historical, but nevertheless it gave me the idea of how to use this thing, was a flail. One of the earliest things I made was a flail, probably when I was about 12. And I found very quickly that so long as you swing the thing, it doesn't hit you. What you do not do is, like you are holding a sword, you don't hit like this with a flail. Instead, you know those kind of continuous circular movements that I often do with swords on videos? You do that with this, okay? So long as you do that, it won't hit you. Even if you hit a solid object, so long as you're keeping the momentum going like this, a bit like a whip. If you think of it like swinging a rope or a whip around, so long as you do this, when you hit the thing, bam, it might for a second knock it back, but then it always, centrifugal force always swings the thing back outwards again with the continued motion. So long as you keep the thing moving around in a fluid way, it doesn't hit you in the hand, it doesn't hit you. But of course these were usually used by people who were wearing degrees of armour in war, so they should have had helmets on, often had gauntlets and bits of body armour. So if it does slightly bounce off you, hopefully it's not too bad. Most of the energy is going to the other guy. So there we go. I will talk in more detail about flails, and I will show some use and some fun things with this flail in future videos. But just to say that yes, they did exist. Yes, they did exist in various forms, and they weren't only used in medieval Europe, they were also used in India and other parts of the world. Cheers folks! Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.